Hi, my name is Aaliyah and welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, this is going to be a video about some horror books that I really like and also some comic books. If I seem tired in this, I've had to re-record this a few times and I'm hoping this one works out. I previously recorded a video that's going to go along with this one, which is some lighter books for the season. So not horror, but like fall and witchy and ghosts and things for people that kind of still want to get in the feelings of the season, but maybe don't like books that are as scary or as dark as actual horror. So I have that video as well, and I'm hoping to put them out at the same time. I'm gonna start with 3 comics that I'm just gonna briefly mention. The first one is Nailbiter, which is by Joshua Williamson, and the 2 artists are Mike Henderson and Adam Guzowski. And this one I have not reread since the first time I read it in probably around like 2016 or something. So that's the main reason I didn't put it on like my main list of recommendations, is just that a lot of these I've reread and I can't say that like currently I still recommend it. So I really liked it when I read it. I read the whole series that was out at that point. There has been a continuation that started maybe last year, I think. I have not read that at all. This series focuses on a small town that has an unusual amount of serial killers that seem to come from this town. So it's not really known why, it's just that for some reason an unusual amount of people from that town go on to become serial killers. And so it's about that, and at the beginning someone that's from some law enforcement or governmental agency, he goes to that town to investigate and see if there's a reason why this town produces so many serial killers. And then it also focuses on one particular killer whose, the media nickname, moniker that he's given is Nailbiter. So it focuses on him and the sheriff of the town. Those are some of the main people it focuses on. Because of the subject matter, there is quite a lot of, blood and violence and everything. But with it being drawn and not the most super realistic, for me, it didn't really bother me. I don't, know how other people will feel, of course. But that was my feeling on it. And I am gonna reread the whole series and read the new stuff that's come out. And then the next one is Ladykiller, which is by Joelle Jones. This one, I believe, was both written and drawn by Joelle Jones. And I've read Ladykiller at least 2 times, maybe 3, I'm not completely sure. It has 2 series that are basically 2 volumes, and I think it might be getting made into a movie. I've heard something about that. I don't know if it's still happening. So this is some of the covers. This is set in the 1950s, is my guess. I don't believe it actually says, but it focuses on a housewife that really has like very stereotypical life with married. She has twin daughters and takes care of the house and the children and does everything she's supposed to and being, you know, perfect wife and everything. But then on the side, she is like a hired assassin or like a hit person. Like she kills people for money. So I don't know completely what she would be defined as, but she works for an agency and whoever they assign her, she just does it basically without question. A good juxtaposition of her two lives, and I always really enjoy reading it. So this is one of the pages. So this is one that I would definitely recommend. I always enjoy rereading it. And then this is the next one. It is called And Then Emily Was Gone. And the writer is John Lees and the artist is Ian Laurie. And the writer and artist are from Scotland, and this book is set in Scotland with like a focus on Scottish like folk tales, fairy tales as monsters. So I'm not, this is like a small publisher company. So I'm not sure if they're set in Scotland too, like they're a Scottish company, but it's a very interesting art style. Like, I can't say that I completely like it, but also it does fit the story. So like, this is an example that I can show. You can just get like an idea of what it looks like. It's just like a very rough style, but it has a lot of character to it, and it does fit for this story. So I do think that it works. And it's basically about finding a missing girl that's been taken by a character, or like a folktale character called Bonnie Shaw, and a like retired policeman that can see monsters. So my other comic books that I'm going to talk about, this is my first one. This is one that I just really wish people knew more about. It's called Gotham by Midnight. I was reading it as it was coming out. So this was in the 2010s. I don't like the late 2010s. I don't remember exactly when, but it is from DC. It is set in Gotham, but it didn't do super well because it just doesn't really have any superheroes in it, but it focuses on a group that's within the police force that isn't really known by most of the police or like people outside of the police, that deals with supernatural threats. And the only character that I think is known previous to the story is the Spectre. Or is it the Spectre or Spectre? I don't know. It's been a long time since I've read anything DC. But I mean, I would say he's big if you read DC comics, but I wouldn't call him someone that like people know of if you're just like a casual comic person. You know, he's not a main DC person, but he's basically the big guy in here. A lot of very interesting characters. The threats they have to deal with are very interesting. I love the art style. It's very unique and fits perfectly with the subject matter. Oh, I never said who the creative team is. The writer, I believe, is Ray Fox. Let me see. I know the artist is Ben Temple-Smith because I actually have his signature on the front of here. I normally keep this packed up because I got it signed at New York Comic-Con in 2018 by the artist. This cover was done by Ben Temple-Smith. Let me see what else I can find as a good example of the art. This is a series that I just wish more people knew about and gave a chance to, because I really loved it and I wish it had gone on for longer, but it just wasn't being read, unfortunately. So the next one is a digital one, and so this is The Me You Love in the Dark, which is written by Scotty Young, who I have known from Marvel because he's very well known for drawing those really cute little chibi type characters. Like, he has a very distinctive style of doing those real cute little versions of the characters, and he usually does like variant covers with them. So that's what I originally know him from. But then he's gone and written quite a few series now on his own, some with indie publishers, indie companies, and some at Marvel. I know at least one at Marvel because I've read some of it. He's written Strange Academy, I believe it's called. I've read some of that and enjoyed it. And then he's also written, no, I can't remember what it's called. I can remember the girl, but it's this girl that gets stuck in like a fairyland, and she's stuck in a little girl's body, but her mind is growing and aging. And I Hate Fairyland, that's what it's called. And so it's actually quite violent. I haven't read too much of it, like an issue maybe, and that was years ago. So, but I do have it on my list. So this one, I don't remember who published it, but it's written by Scotty Young. It's drawn by Jorge Corona. And again, like, the art works perfectly with the theme and the mood of the story. And it basically starts with I assume she's in her 20s. This young artist moving temporarily into this old house so that she can work on her paintings and have like inspiration. And it's this very old, like, creepy place, and it ends up that there's some sort of something living there with her, which at first seems good and helpful, and then it turns a little bit different. I think for all of these books, like the comics and the books, so many of them have a lot of trigger warnings, which I know some people like hate the whole idea of trigger warnings, but for me, I find them very useful. There are things that I like to avoid, even when I'm reading horror, or I at least like to be aware of. So I will probably put the trigger warnings, I think, in the description, because for some of these, there are some pretty significant things that some people might want to avoid, because just because you like scary books and dark books doesn't mean you necessarily are okay with every subject matter. So this does have some relationship dynamics that could be difficult for some people, some stuff that I don't necessarily usually like to read, you know, but I still thought it's a really good comic. So here's the cover. This is a little bit of the comic. That just gives an idea of some of the direction it heads, but I'm also trying not to give too much of a spoiler. Okay, next is Junji Ito, which this is the only one of his books that I own. This is Lovesickness, and it's a collection of a few stories. The largest story in here is about this character. I don't remember what, yeah, it was Lovesickness is what the collection was called, and then there's two that go under the strange Hikizuri siblings, and then there's just a few that are by themselves. So I've read quite a bit of Junji Ito like up to now, and I've enjoyed all of it that I've read. I really like his art, and the stories are usually very interesting. If you have trouble with body horror or things that are just like gross, he might not be the person to read, particularly because it's visual, but most that kind of stuff doesn't usually bother me, so I haven't really had a problem. This main story centers a lot around young girls, like teenage girls, that are compelled to harm themselves, so just be aware of that. Not a huge amount that I can show on YouTube because there is a lot of blood and also just disturbing images, you know. There's a lot of reanimated dead people. This is some art that I can show. I enjoy his stuff. I haven't really branched out too much to other Japanese horror writers, and I know that there's others, and I think there's some others that I have on my TBR, but if anyone watches this, you can definitely suggest others to me, because I do like, I mean, I like horror in general, but I think I also particularly like Japanese horror. So that's Junji Ito, just kind of as a whole. Basically, like, that's an example, but basically I would just say if you can deal with gross things, then I would check out Junji Ito, because he has very interesting stories. So next is Hexed, which I had completely forgotten about this when I was putting together these lists. And then I reread both series. There's one from 2008 to 2009, and then there's one from 2014 to 2016, and I read both. And I knew I had liked it, but I still really like both of them, and they work together really well. All of it is written by the same writer, Michael Allen Nelson. And then the first series, the artist was Emma Rios, and the second series was Dan Mora. And I was initially gonna put this with my Witchy Fall video because it's about a witch, but then as I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is a lot more gory than I remembered. So it doesn't really fit with the vibe of that video. So this centers on a girl that I would say is probably in her 20s, maybe early 20s. It's a bit uncertain, but she is a really good thief, but also she practices magic, and she basically steals magical things. And there's just a whole world of demons and people trying to rule the magical underworld, but it's basically being run like mafia, and it's very interesting, the whole overarching plot, the way everything works out from the first book that basically just kind of introduces the world, like the first series. And then when there's the 3 volumes that come out in the second series, those work out very well in continuing the story, and then how everything wraps up in the 3 volumes. I would say everything ties up really well. I mean, I still wish that more would come out, but I think that how everything was written was very good. So this is her catching a demon and putting it in that little stuffed animal, and then she does use that throughout the series as like her pet demon to kill people and stuff. That is her against this demon. That is a character called the Harlot, who is actually very important throughout all of the books, but I don't want to get too much into her storyline. This is in one of the later books, but the one in the hoodie is the main character, and she's trying to steal something at the same time as those guys and ends up summoning that snake to take care of. That lady in white is very important for the whole story too, and she's using that guy to talk. She talks through him because she doesn't speak. So that was, like, it was really great to reread that. I was surprised at how much, like, exploding people and torn apart people and stuff there was. I didn't remember all of that, but I still really enjoyed the story. So next I'm going to talk about Wytches. That is the name. It's Wytches, and it's written by Scott Snyder. The artist is named Jock, and this one also just has a very interesting art style. Particularly, it's the coloring over top of the drawing that is really unique and adds to the atmosphere, the creepiness of the story. And it's about a girl and her family moving to this new town, but then also it's hard to tell the story without like telling too much, but there seems to be people in the town knowing about things that are going on in the woods, and I can't quite. So this is at the very beginning, and if you can see, there's a person in that tree, and there is a whole thing about basically people in the town pledge people to something in the woods. and get something in return. So that's Wytches. Next is something that's pretty well known, but The Sandman. This is the first one in the series, the first volume. It's by Neil Gaiman, and I think there's a few different artists. I think all of these on the front are the artists. And this came out a long time ago. I know I was looking at it when this originally came out. I think it was the 90s. And you can tell by some of like the references and just kind of the language and stuff. I have not really reread it recently, and I also never got all the way through the series, because when I was reading this, so many years ago, back when I lived, in a different state, and I was borrowing them from the library, and I only read up until what the library had, which, I don't know, it might have been up to like Doll's House, and I roughly remember what happened, but I haven't gone back to it since. I just haven't gotten to it. I, over the years, was purchasing some of them when I could. I just haven't read them since I've gotten them, but I remember liking it. He's one of my favorite authors. I've read a lot of his stuff. He writes, a lot of different genres, and I do want to go back to this and try and make it all the way through the series. The artist that does the covers and like the issue covers, I love his art. Forget who that one is. I know I had looked it up because I know Neil Gaiman has worked with him quite a bit. Dave McKean. He's worked with him on other things. He has a very distinctive art style that I always notice when he does like the covers or the illustrations for Neil Gaiman stuff. But it's such an involved story what this expands into, but it basically starts with this kind of like secret organization trying to summon death and ending up summoning Dream, and both of them, they're siblings. They're part of what's called the Endless. I don't remember all of them, but Dream and Death are two of the Endless, and then there's others. But some of what I remember is basically through the series is it's Dream's adventure through Earth, and also I think different worlds, trying to get back to his world. And I don't know, there's just like, I don't remember how everything I remember from it, how it connects. So I definitely want to go back to it. So like, this is Dream talking to the Hecate. Like, I believe they'd also be called the Graces, the 3-in-1. Like, there's a few names, but it's basically like the crone, the mother, and is it the maiden, I think? I don't quite remember. But I kind of know of it from, like, of them and the idea of it from Greek mythology. Oh, and then I know in this issue there's a bunch of characters that I know from DC Comics. Like, there's Constantine, who I really like. I love Constantine. And then this is Etrigan. And who else was there? But anyways, yeah. And I know there's other characters that are in here. So I can't talk in huge detail about it just because it's been a long time since I've read it, but I can still recommend it because I remember I liked it a lot. So this one is Gideon Falls, and let's see if I have who it's by. I don't think so. Well, I'm not sure where I put it. I might have to write it and later. This is Gideon Falls, and I have read 1 volume of it. And first of all, one of the things I really like is just the layout. And so I am holding it the right way. This is how it's presented, upside down. And this is the cover to the first one. And then like there's just very interesting layouts, which I really appreciate when layouts are used in a creative way to help tell the story, like this too. So this story centers on a man that seems to have some sort of mental illness, some sort of compulsions that he's having trouble with, where he feels the need to collect trash that he finds outside and put them in containers in his house, categorize them, and it seems to be unnecessary, but he explains that there's this black barn that he has to recreate, and it actually is further in the comics starting to seem like maybe that is a real thing. This is one of the other panels. This is one of the other panels, and this is the black barn. So I've read that 1 volume of it, and I intend to continue it. I really liked where it was going and where that volume left off with what seems to be happening. So that's my comics. So this next section is the books. Don't need that. Okay, so now I'm going to the book section, and probably gonna not talking about these as in depth as I had planned to. I might kind of speed through them because it is getting late. I'm tired, I'm hungry. I've been working at this for a while because of all the issues I've had, so we'll see. So I have my 3 just like brief mentions are ones that I just kind of felt like didn't really fit exactly into horror. So I was just gonna kind of mention them because I still like them, and they kind of are. So first is Neverworld Wake. So it's been several years since I read this, and I actually do want to reread it, but I really liked it when I read it. It's by Marisha Peschel, and what I think is the horror aspect to this is more the existential horror, because this has a group of teenagers basically get trapped in kind of a time loop. They're stuck in a world where they're just repeating the same day, and they're aware that they are, and they're able to do different things. Like they're doing all sorts of things and changing their actions, and at first they're having fun, but it's this idea of what happens to your mind when you're just repeating and repeating and in this loop. And I thought it was really, really interesting. And then there also is this murder mystery that's going on as well. That was kind of the reason why they got stuck into this world. But I wouldn't necessarily call it horror. Like it's kind of a mystery, not really sci-fi. I don't know exactly what you'd call it, but it does kind of have like an existential horror aspect. And then next is Elatsoe is, I believe, how it's pronounced. And it's YA. The author is Darcy Littlebadger. The author is Indigenous, so is the main character and a lot of the other characters in it. And her being Indigenous is important to the story. It's about her cousin being murdered and like figuring that out. And then there's also a bit of magic involved. There's a ghost dog that I love. He was so cute. And I wouldn't really necessarily call it horror, but I don't really know what I would call it. I mean, like light horror, like I don't know. There's just some things I don't necessarily know exactly what genre to put them in, but definitely like the ending goes more a little bit into horror. I actually really liked the ending, that it went dark. I enjoyed that. And the girl, I don't remember her name. Actually, I think Elatsoe was her name. The main character, she is ace and arrow, asexual and aromantic, which is also just, you know, nice representation. So I really liked that, but also I just wouldn't necessarily classify it as horror. And then this is just a short novella that I don't even know how I ended up finding out about it, but it's a Tor.com book that I got for either my birthday or Hanukkah, like maybe 2 years ago, I think. It's 163 pages. It's called Out of Body by Jeffrey Ford. Oh, it's possible that how I found out about it is that a blurb on the back is from Stephen Graham Jones, and I like him. And that's possible. I'm not quite sure. But again, I wouldn't... This one is a little more in horror, but it's just kind of, it's paranormal. It's a little sci-fi-ish, but not exactly. It's about a librarian that learns how to astral project, I believe it is, but like kind of like travel when he's asleep and dreaming, but there's another world, like there's things happening in this astral world, and there are some bad things happening that you have to actually be worried about. It starts out as fun, but then there's some, I don't remember exactly what they were, but like there was some sort of bad creatures or ghosties or something that could cause harm while they were doing their little astral journey. And it was really just kind of him doing that and deciding what he was gonna end up doing and learning more about that world and everything. And you know, I wouldn't call anything about it like necessarily, at least to me, like scary or horror. It was interesting, maybe a little bit creepy, but yeah, kind of hard to categorize, but still good. So the actual like things I more clearly categorize as horror. The first two I put ones that I like haven't. The first two I put in those places because they're ones that I still like haven't forgotten. They had things in them that were very like impactful and also kind of scarring. So the first one I would say was the worst for me in terms of subject matter. It's called Dark Choir. It's by Paul Melhuish. I would say it's probably the closest I've ever read to extreme horror, which isn't really a genre I'm terribly interested in because most of it is subject matter that is just things I try to avoid. And I was reading this for like an online book club. It was years ago. And if I had looked at the specific trigger warnings, I think I even might have and decided to read it anyways. But it's definitely things that I normally would avoid. Basically, anything you can think of is in there. It's like, I thought it was a really good book. I think I gave it 5 stars. Like, what I liked was that there was a good story. So I think if people are going to write things like extreme horror, which I don't know that this actually is, but if they're going to write that, instead of just writing a whole bunch of horrible things happening, you need to actually have a good story. And this was a good story that also just had a whole bunch of horrible things happening. But it basically, I'll put trigger warnings in the description because it's kind of too many to mention. But it's in England, and a guy is going back to his home. His mom died, and he has an adult sister who is physically and mentally disabled, and so she needs help being taken care of. And he gets a new nurse for her, and he also helps to take care of her. But then there starts to be like a lot of weird stuff happening in the town, and there's things that he starts to uncover about things that happened in the past in that town, a lot of bad things that happened specifically to, I think all of them were children that were physically and mentally disabled when they were in care at a specific place, ways that they were harmed. And there's basically something is starting to happen so that people that caused them harm in the past it's basically seeming like revenge is being taken against them. But a lot of those people, the now adults that have the disabilities, they're not physically able to have done the things to the people that harmed them. So it's kind of like a mystery on who's actually causing the current violence. And like I said, it's there's quite a lot of graphic things. Violence against children, disabled children, violence against adults, like torture and stuff. I have a lot of trouble with torture, but yeah. I still, in the end though, found it to be a good book, even with it being very difficult. So that was my number one, because like it still has stuck with me for years. And then my number 2 is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay, which recently got made into a movie, which I'm probably not going to see because I know that what's his name, Shyamalan, changed the ending. And one of the things that's stuck with me the most is the book's ending. It was one of the best, it might have been like my favorite part about the book was that he decided to end it in an uncertain way like that. I thought it was really effective. And hearing how Shyamalan decided to change it so much, and particularly just the way that he changed it, took all of the effectiveness out of the story. But if you don't know what it's about, this couple with their daughter goes to like a vacation cabin. They're going on a vacation, and they get visited by 4 people that just kind of come out of nowhere, and they come with weapons, and these people tie up the dads and not the little girl, just the dads, and basically tell them that one of them has to choose to die in order to save the world. Like, if they don't, the world's going to end. And like throughout the book, the 4 of them explain how they've found each other because they were getting these messages of the impending end of the world, and that there needed to be a sacrifice, like a willing sacrifice of these people in order to end the world. And so that's basically how it starts, and there's a lot that happens. And I will, like, for some of these books, I'm going to put the main trigger warning, but it's also a spoiler. So I'm going to figure out how I'm going to do that, because there's another book that has a few trigger warnings that I think people should be aware of, but also they're spoilers. So I'm going to figure that out. But I liked the book, but then what really made it for me was how it ended. I enjoyed that choice that he made, and that things weren't made more certain or happier. I don't want to spoil things, but they could have been made a lot different, and I liked the choice that he made on that. So this is the next one. This is Come Closer by Sarah Gran, which I do plan to reread. Also, I just didn't get a chance to reread it before making this video, but it's another pretty short one. Like, I don't know if you would call it a novella, probably. It's less than 200 pages, I think. Yeah, it's 184. And I actually prefer the cover that I more often see, but this was, I don't know, I got this really cheap online from somewhere. So this was the cover that was available. The cover I more often see is like a face and a mirror and like blood covering most of the mirror. But this is about a woman that starts off that she's in really nice and healthy relationship. I believe they're married, and she's got a good job and things are going well. And then things start to go a little weird. She's starting to hear sound in her apartment that's starting to bother her. She's starting to lose time. Her behavior's starting to change, and like slowly, like some things are happening and things start to go like really downhill. And then she's thinking, when she's doing some research, looking into things, and it starts to seem like maybe something's happening with a demon. Starts to become more certain that maybe she's dealing with a possession. But then there's definitely is it a possession? Is it mental illness? A little bit of that, but then it definitely goes much more towards possession. And then things like really ramp up towards the end. And you have to be okay with basically things just being sad and a bit desolate, and like one of those stories where things were nice and then everything goes horrible. And things are gonna wrap up nicely, but like it's still really good and it's creepy, and I really enjoyed it. It's a really great short read. And then I think that's everything that I physically own. So the next two I kind of want to do together because I kind of relate them as being like the YA and middle grade version of each other a little bit. The YA one is Burn Down, Rise Up by Vincent Tirado, and this was their like first book, and I'm currently reading their second one, which I also really like. This was one of my favorite books that I've read, within the last few months. I don't remember exactly when I read this, but it was just really, really good. It centers on the Bronx and a game that you play in the subways, that you play in like the early mornings. Like I think you have to start it after midnight and you can't stop before 4 a.m. And there's all these rules, but then there's been kids that have gone missing while playing it. And there also seems to be some sort of weird infection that's spreading because of playing it. And a person that the main character knows ends up going missing because of playing this game. So she gets involved in trying to figure out what's going on with it. And she plays it at some point. So we do go into this kind of parallel world that happens when you play this game, this subway game. And there's a lot that's talked about because it has to do with the parallel world, that has to do with the history of the Bronx and a time period where the slumlords were not taking care of the apartments, the places where their tenants were living, and they ended up getting like mold, and there was a huge fire that went through a part of the Bronx. And this is an actual historical fact. I don't know too much about it besides what was in the book, but it is a historical thing that happened. And a whole bunch of people died or injured, and it really just had to do with negligence and not caring about the lower income people living there and not caring about the conditions that they are living in. And so that is also like a big part of it. So there's, the horror, creepy game aspect of it, but then there's also the like real world horror part of this, of what people do to other people, and our history, and that it's important to know history and remember it. So I really liked that book, and then kind of connected because of the game aspect is Hide and Seeker by Daka Herman. And this one is middle grade. And I believe I mostly consumed this through audiobook, and that was good. And this one is about hide and seek, and it's basically kind of an evil game of hide and seek because it's this character, I don't know exactly what you would call it, but this creature that if you play hide and seek with it, then if you break any of the rules of hide and seek, then that person will disappear into its world, which is like this dark, like legitimately creepy world. I did find just the idea of it and what the kids in that world were going through was not enjoyable. And so it was well conceived. It was good. And there's a group of kids that are trying to get their friend back that has disappeared into that hide and seek world. And so I kind of feel like these two go together a little bit because they're both like these dark games. So that's both of those. And then let's see Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant, which is another name for Shauna McGuire. I think she uses Mira Grant for her more sci-fi stuff. So I loved this because this is kind of what I like mermaids to be. I like the idea of them being dark and ferocious and not just pretty. And this is much more playing into a siren aspect of them, but they're even more vicious than that because they're actual predators. They're not just luring, they're actually going after people. And they're much more monster, but it's a group of people that are going on a mission to research mermaids, but I believe they don't know too much about them, really. Like, at this point, there's not a whole lot known about their existence. It's more of a going to discover them kind of mission. And, like, they're not prepared at all for what they end up discovering. Don't really get attached to anyone. And I just really like how there was some attempt at science put into their, Shannon's creation of the mermaids, like some idea of if mermaids existed in the real world, what might they be like? And they're much more fish and like shark and sea creature. They're not really human at all. And how they communicate is interesting, how they hunt. I really like this idea of mermaids. It's also kind of my feeling about vampires in fiction, which they're meant to be vicious, and I don't want to read like vampire romance. I want to see them being terrible and predators, because that's what they're supposed to be like. I like this conception of mermaids. So that's Into the Drowning Deep. And next is The Clown Brigade, which is by Stephen Graham Jones. And this was also a novella. It's quite short. I read it digitally. And this is one that I'm going to put trigger warnings in because there's some things that could bother people, but also a lot of the trigger warnings are spoilers. So, but I also think anyone that has difficulty with like one of the main aspects of it, kind of like I was able to right away figure out what how I was able to kind of figure out what was going to be that's what's happening, I was able to figure that out basically from the beginning, because if you've dealt with those kind of situations, you can see it. So if you're something you're sensitive to, you're also going to figure it out right away. But anyways, there's only so much I can say about it because it's short, and there's only so much I can say about it without spoiling it. But basically how it's described is that it's a guy going to see this girl that he's been talking to online. He goes to visit her, but on the way he keeps on seeing these clowns popping up everywhere, and they're like taunting him and stuff, and he's not sure what's going on. And that's really all that you can say about it. But I would say if you like Stephen Graham Jones, it's a good short story. Yeah, there's not a whole lot I can say about it, but yeah, I mean, it's a good short story, and I would give it a try. Next is The Last House on Needless Street by Catriona Ward, and this is the first time I've read anything by her, but I do currently have on my Kindle, I'm borrowing from the library, her most recent book, because I did really like this. It's very interesting, all the different things that it seems like is happening with it. There's also only so much I can say about it, because like one of the main things, I would say that's a spoiler. There's a woman that is trying to find her sister that was kidnapped when they were children. There's a guy in his house that you focus on a lot, and he seems like he might be the person that kidnapped her sister and has possibly taken other children, done other things. You see some of what is happening in this guy's house and some of his past, but there's a lot of things that start unfolding that change what you thought was happening, and things start like kind of changing a lot in terms of what it seemed like was actually happening. I did have an idea from fairly early on of what might have been one of the big reveals, but that didn't make it like worse to read it. It was still like that didn't make the story any worse for me to have kind of had an idea of it. And I can't necessarily speak to if that aspect of the book was handled well, but I felt that it was the book itself, and that part seemed well written. I don't know if there's any reviewers that have written from that perspective, if that was handled well. And yeah, I liked how things wrapped up too. So there's definitely a lot of dark aspects to it, you know, because it has to do with child kidnapping and death. And then there's also a lot of child neglect and abuse and things like that. So, and like right at the beginning, there's some animal harm, but I believe that was the only instance of it, and that's something I tend to have an issue with. So there's that. Let me see. This might be my last one. Yes, this is my last one. The Girl from the Well is by Rin Chapeko, and I read this quite a while ago too, and I actually do want to reread it because I also do want to read the sequel at some point. But this is set in Japan, and it's kind of based on Japanese ghost story, I believe, like a Japanese ghost folktale kind of character. And there's a main teenage boy that it focuses on, but it also switches perspectives and focuses on this ghost girl. Her name is Okiku, and she basically takes revenge on people that have harmed children. So there's several instances of children dying in bad ways. And then also the ways that she kills people are quite violent. Her perspective is very interesting, the way that it's written. And I remember finding this book like legitimately creepy. I don't necessarily find that I really get like scared, but I did find it legitimately creepy, and there were things that were very upsetting. And there is one scene that is based on a kind of famous crime in Japan. I don't remember the victim's name right now, but it was a really horrible case of some teenage boys that like horribly harmed a teenage girl, and then she died. And it's pretty widely known. So it was interesting that that case was used as inspiration in one of these scenes. And so that's one thing that happens in the book, and it's definitely a difficult scene, both what happens to the victim and knowing that that's something that also really happened. But then, you know, there's a lot of violence from what Okiku does as well. So I think her part of the story is really interesting. It was probably what I preferred, but there's also a lot that has to do with the main boy character, and you know, they end up like meeting, and there's a lot that happens, like supernatural stuff and other forces and things like that. So that is all of my books. I hope that this had enough energy, because I know that I was kind of tired in this, but I got it recorded, so there's that. If you liked this video, I have my other one that I recorded. I have other videos. You can watch those. You can like this or subscribe to my channel. I post a lot, having a lot of videos about my animals, so you can watch those also. Thank you for watching. Bye.